Before we begin today's video, here's my recipe for the perfect start to any day. It's coffee, shower, aftershave. And though today's sponsor can't help you with the first or second step in that routine, they've certainly got that third step covered. I am, of course, talking about Scentbird, the company that's reimagining everything about how people discover, shop for, purchase, and even experience fragrances. Scentbird lets you choose a new designer fragrance every month for just $17. With each fragrance, you'll get a 30-day supply in one of these travel-friendly vials, so you can try them out before committing to a full-size bottle. They have perfumes, colognes, and plenty of unisex options to choose from. This month, I received 3 of my favourites. Yuso Verd, Joga. This has to be my wife's personal favourite. It's the perfect after-shower scent that's bound to turn a few heads. Creed Aventus. This one's full of sophisticated, warming notes. And finally, Raw Spirit Wildfire, an exotic blend of jasmine petals, lang-lang, cedarwood, Australian sandalwood and musk. Right now, viewers of my channel can get 55% off their first month at Scentbird. Scan my QR code on screen, or click my link in the description box below to get started, and make sure to use my coupon code, MASQUERADE. With that code, it's just a little over $7 for your first month, available in the USA and Canada. Thank you Scentbird for the sponsor. Make sure to use my coupon code, MASQUERADE, for 55% off your first month. CCTV cameras. The unblinking eyes that are always watching. From deterring crimes to aiding investigations, they play an important role in maintaining public safety. But there are rare instances where these devices capture something both unexpected and unsettling. The last moments of a person's life. November 22nd, 2023. It was 4 PM, and 22-year-old university student Dru Sjodin had just finished her shift at the Victoria's Secret store she worked at, located in the Columbia Mall in Grand Forks, North Dakota. After clocking off, she spent an hour walking through the mall in search of a new purse to buy. This still, captured by a Marshallfield store security camera, shows her making said purchase. These were the last images ever captured of Dru, alive. Immediately after exiting the Marshall Fields, Dru began making her way to her 1994 Oldsmobile Cutlass, which was parked in the mall's lot. As she walked, she chatted with her boyfriend, Chris Lang, on her phone. The couple had been talking for 4 minutes when Chris heard Dru mutter the words, "Okay, okay," as if speaking to someone in the background. Then, the line cut out. According to Chris, Dru didn't sound distressed or nervous, and he assumed that the call had just dropped. 3 hours later, at 7:42 PM, Chris received yet another call from Dru's number. He answered, but only heard static and the sounds of buttons being pressed on the other end of the line. According to the authorities, this call had been placed from somewhere near Fisher, Minnesota. When Dru didn't show up for work at her other job that night, her nearest and dearest began to fear that something may have happened to her. Law enforcement were contacted, and an investigation into the young woman's disappearance began. It didn't take them long to find Dru's car. It was right where she had left it, in the mall's parking lot. Strangely, the sheath of a sharp blade was found on one of the front seats, strongly suggesting that upon opening her car, somebody had approached her, and then, after unsheathing their blade, told her to get inside their vehicle, or else. On December 1st, a little over a week after she had vanished, detectives investigating Dru's disappearance paid a visit to a Minnesotan man with a dark past. 50-year-old Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., a registered Level 3 offender who lived with his mother in Crookston, a mere 12-mile drive from Fisher. He had been released from prison less than 7 months prior after serving a 23-year sentence for multiple. His Level 3 designation meant he was highly likely to reoffend. The investigators questioned Alfonso about Dru's disappearance, and he admitted that he had indeed been near the Columbia Mall on the day that she had disappeared, but he had an explanation for that. At the moment that Dru's call with Chris had cut out, Alfonso had been in the mall cinema, watching the movie Once Upon a Time in Mexico. There was just one problem with that story though. Once Upon a Time in Mexico hadn't been playing in the mall's theatre on November 22nd. In fact, it hadn't been playing anywhere in Grand Forks.
Tell us that you went to the movie theater, but that doesn't really pad out.
You think maybe you were actually somewhere else than the movie theater?
I don't know. No, I don't know. I know I wasn't at the mall when this girl was abducted.
Officers also found receipts in Alfonso's wallet. Receipts for a knife, which he had purchased at a store just outside the mall on November 22nd. That same blade was found inside his car, soaking in a cleaning solution. A woman's shoe and blood were also found inside his vehicle. Both belonged to Dru. On April 17th, 2004, 5.5 long months after she had gone missing, Dru's body was finally discovered just west of Crookston, Minnesota, hidden in a drainage ditch. She had been concealed under a blanket of snow which had only just thawed. Her hands were bound behind her back. She had been punctured by a sharp blade and showed signs of having been. A shopping bag found nearby is believed to have been placed over her head. An exact COD has never been established. It may have been the punctures. It may have been the bag on her head. It may have been that Alfonso simply left her to the elements. Aside from the obvious, Alfonso had made one fatal mistake. He had forcibly taken Dru in the mall car park in North Dakota, but took her life in Minnesota. That meant that the incident had occurred across state lines, making it a federal case. Individually, neither North Dakota or Minnesota have the death penalty, but federal cases are eligible for capital punishment. So rather than facing just a life behind bars, Alfonso was now looking at an early departure from this life. His case was the first capital trial to be held in North Dakota in a century. After being found guilty of taking Dru's life, Alfonso was formally sentenced to death on February 8, 2006. However, that decision would be amended on May 18, 2023, when his sentence was reduced to life without parole. In the past, I've dedicated an entire video to why you should never let anyone take you to a second location. But on the odd chance that this information could save someone listening, please always remember that even if someone has you at point-blank range and is telling you to get inside their vehicle or else, don't do it. Run, resist, scream, do whatever you have to do, but don't get inside that car. If they're dragging you, go limp and keep shouting, because as soon as you're inside and you've been taken to crime scene B, your chances of survival drop to near zero. Don't let your fear get the better of you. Never just comply and hope for the best. And that's the best strategy in a normal hold-up, sure. Just give the robber what they want and get away with your life. They want your money, not you. But when a perp tells you to get inside their car, don't. Your odds are always better at the primary location, where there are likely other people within earshot, where medical help is close at hand, and where the perp faces the most risk of being caught. I recently learned about a term used in the aviation community. Get there-itis. Known as the pilot killer, get there-itis has claimed the lives of many aviators, celebrities, and VIPs. Whether due to pressure from their clients, their bosses, or even themselves, private plane and helicopter operators will often embark on flights despite dangerous conditions or capacity issues, all in an effort to just get there. It could be that the pilot has a lot of money riding on the flight itself, or that they just want to finish up with work and get home to their families. Or maybe their client may have a big meeting, or a show to perform. Or, in this case, a wedding to attend. Their own wedding. It was December 2016, and 32-year-old Rosemary do Nascimento Silva was on her way to the altar to marry her fiancé, Uderli Damasceno. Their wedding venue was located in the rural outskirts of Sao Paulo, Brazil, with plenty of large fields around. And so, rather than arrive in a luxury car or a horse-drawn carriage, Rosemary wanted to make a statement. That love has no bounds. And what better way to make that statement than by arriving in a helicopter? Making her entrance in such a fashion had been a dream of Rosemary's since she was just a child, and she had booked a flight in secret, hoping to stun both her guests and her future husband, and make her arrival an unforgettable moment. Of the 300 people attending the wedding, only 6 of them knew about Rosemary's planned surprise. It was supposed to be the happiest moment of her life. Not the last. On the afternoon of the wedding, Rosemary stepped inside her booked Robinson 44 helicopter, alongside her brother, Silvano, and her wedding photographer, Nela Cristina Neves, who was 6 months pregnant. Despite poor visibility and weather conditions, their pilot, Peterson Pinheiro, decided that the flight could go ahead as planned. It's unclear why he felt this way. He may have felt pressured into just getting there, but ultimately, it was his choice to go ahead with the proceedings. It was going to be a rough flight though, no doubt about that, but the show must go on. Besides, their route to the wedding venue was only a 15-minute flight. Even if things got a little bumpy for the passengers, it'd all be over before they knew it. Wedding photographer Naylor filmed the entire flight. In the footage, the passengers all appear happy, albeit a little apprehensive. And looking at just how thick the fog was outside, it's easy to see why. As the flight progresses, the look of concern on Rosemary and Silvano's faces becomes all the more apparent, especially when they hit turbulence and the helicopter begins making some unexpected noises. Naylor turns her camera to show just how thick the fog outside was, at which point, disaster strikes. The pilot urges everyone to remain calm, and then, in a heartbeat, the helicopter collides with the ground, killing all 4 passengers on impact. The camera continues to roll, and 2 minutes later, voices from locals in the background can be heard approaching the wreckage, announcing, "They're dead." The helicopter had crashed in a wooded area beside a main road, just 1 mile from their destination. The exact cause of the crash remains unclear, though given the atrocious visibility, it's speculated that the pilot may have accidentally hit a tree concealed by the fog. Still, no explanation could mend the broken hearts left behind. Rosemary's parents, guests, and of course groom continue to wait patiently for her to arrive, mingling and preparing for a day of celebration, unaware of what had just happened to her. Eventually, news of the crash made its way to the pastor, who informed the groom of the tragedy. Uderli, who knew nothing about his bride-to-be's planned surprise, was left in a state of total shock and dismay. I suppose Rosemary's story reminds us of the fragility of life, how quickly and unexpectedly it can be snatched away from us, and how we should prioritize safety and value the time we have with the people who matter most. The full video clip of the crash can be found online, though I don't recommend seeking it out. It's not graphic, but hearing the passengers' screams and seeing the terror on their faces moments before their end, well, that stays with you. Take a look at these images. They're taken from the music video for the 2001 single, Rock the Boat, performed by Alia Dana Horton, better known simply as Alia, a singer from the late 90s, early 2000s, whose self-titled album is genuinely one of my favourite pop records from that era. This video, filmed on Abaco Island in the Bahamas, is composed of various clips of Alia and her background dancers performing on the beach and on a boat. On the surface, it's your typical run-of-the-mill music video from the early noughties. But when put in context, it becomes something much darker. You see, just a few short hours after filming these dance routines aboard the yacht, Alia would be dead. Alia's career began at the tender age of 15 when she released her 1994 debut album, Age Ain't Nothing But a Number, produced by none other than Robert R. Kelly. Unfortunately, she was one of his numerous victims. Since Kelly wrote and produced most of Alia's early material, he had a particularly strong grip on her, and reportedly went so far as to illegally marry her when she was still 15 and he was 27, forging her date of birth on their marriage certificate. Thankfully, she would escape his grip, and he'd eventually face justice in June 2022 when he was sentenced to 30 years behind bars on a plethora of charges. But that's another story. After separating from Kelly, Alia went on to work with the likes of Timbaland and was considered a rising superstar with a big future ahead of her. With her silky vocals, captivating stage presence, and strong acting chops, Alia had all the markings of a true icon, and many have suggested that she'd be standing alongside the likes of Beyoncé nowadays. But instead, her promising career was to come to an abrupt end on August 5th, 2001. That afternoon, Alia and her crew had just wrapped up filming the music video for Rock the Boat. The shoot had finished a day earlier than scheduled, and everyone involved was eager to return to Florida to continue working on the project and see their families. Rather than wait for their scheduled flight the next morning, Alia and her core entourage called for a private jet to pick them up that afternoon. The group became impatient due to the plane arriving 2 hours later than expected. To their surprise, the twin-engine Cessna 402 that had arrived to pick them up was a lot smaller than the Cessna 404 that had dropped them off at the island. The 402 had a capacity of 7 passengers, but 8 people were looking to board the plane with all of their luggage and equipment. Despite protestations from the pilot, all of the core entourage boarded the plane. At just before 7 PM, the aircraft began its departure from Abaco Island. But moments after takeoff, the plane suddenly nosedived and crashed into the ground just 200 feet from the end of the runway. It erupted into flames, killing all 9 people on board. Pilot Luis Morales III, hairstylist Eric Foreman, Anthony Dodd, security guard Scott Gallen, makeup stylist Christopher Maldonado, Keith Wallace, record company employees Douglas Kratz and Gina Smith, and of course, rising star Alia, who was just 22 years old. An investigation into what caused the crash found that the plane had been overloaded with 700 extra pounds of gear, as well as an extra passenger. It also found that the pilot, Luis Morales III, had falsified records about his experience with Cessna 402s. An autopsy revealed traces of cocaine in his system. Perhaps the most unsettling element about this incident, though, was that Alia herself was deathly afraid of flying, especially in smaller planes. She had urged her team to wait for a bigger plane to become available, which would have only taken about an hour and a half to arrive, but the other passengers were desperate to head back to Miami as soon as possible, and urged her to get inside. According to a biography written by Kathy Ian Dolly, Alia refused to do so. In response, one of her entourage slipped her a sedative, which rendered her unconscious. She was then carried aboard the plane. As far as I can tell, no witnesses have come forward to corroborate Kathy Ian Dolly's version of events, but if true, that adds a whole new layer of horror to this story. What we do know is that members of Alia's entourage were heard arguing with the pilot shortly before takeoff. According to one witness, quote, "The pilot tried to convince them that the plane was overloaded, but they insisted that they had chartered the plane and that they had to be in Miami Saturday night." And so it was that in yet another case of get-there-itis, 9 more lives came to an end. You can find the original version of Alia's Rock the Boat music video right here on YouTube. Watching it now, knowing that the clips of her dancing on the yacht were filmed mere hours before her demise, is a strange experience, to say the least. You're not just watching a choreographed dance routine set to music. You're witnessing the last moments of Alia's life. her final day immortalized in a video where she'll remain forever young. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the story of Marianne Bachmeier, but it's one that's definitely worth sharing. Marianne was born in 1950 and had grown up in West Germany in an extremely strict household. During her teenage years, she was described by many as a troubled adolescent, often staying out well into the early hours and arguing with her mother, who eventually kicked Marianne out of the house. Shortly thereafter, Marianne would have her first child at the age of just 16, and her second at 18. Both were put up for adoption. At 23, she had her third child, Anna, who she chose to raise by herself. Since she couldn't afford a nanny, Marianne would take Anna to the pub where she worked at and partied at each day. As the years went by, it became clear that the mother and daughter were developing a dysfunctional relationship. Anna was often left to take care of herself while her mother socialized through the night and slept through the day. It's been said that Marianne treated Anna more like a little adult than a child. In 1980, Anna had developed into a bright and vibrant 7-year-old, though one who was still unhappy with her home life, or perhaps I should say, pub life. The friction between her and her mother had only grown over the years, and on the morning of May 5th, the pair had gotten into an argument. As a result, Anna decided to skip school that day, and instead chose to go and visit a friend of hers and calm down. Almost immediately after leaving her home in Lübeck, Anna was approached by one of her neighbors, a 35-year-old butcher named Klaus Grabowski. He told the youngster that he had several cats in his apartment and asked if she would like to come and play with them for a while. Oblivious to his true intentions, Anna said yes. I won't go over all of the things that Klaus did to Anna over those next few hours. They're just too horrific for me to talk about. But as you've probably guessed, he would end up taking the youngster's life. He then bound Anna with rope and placed her inside a box, one which he left on the shores of a nearby canal. But although Klaus was a monster, his fiancée, thankfully, wasn't. When she returned to the apartment after work that evening, she realized something was off, and eventually learned of what Klaus had done to Anna. She immediately contacted the authorities. Anna's body was swiftly found by the canal, and Klaus was charged with her slaying. The news devastated her mother, Marianne. Although she had a fractious relationship with her daughter, she of course loved her deeply, and she wasn't going to let her killer get away with what he had done. Klaus Grabowski's trial began on March 3rd, 1981, where he testified that he had a good reason to take Anna's life. He claimed that on the morning of May 5th, Anna had left her home, knocked on his door, and then made advances towards him. He was weak and allowed himself to be taken advantage of. According to Klaus, Anna then tried to blackmail him out of all of his money, saying that she'd tell the authorities what he had done if he didn't pay up. Outraged by his obvious lie, Marianne decided to end this creep's existence. This photo of Marianne wearing a long coat was snapped on March 6th as she entered the courthouse for the third day of the trial. What the image doesn't show, however, is what this vengeful mother was concealing under her coat in that very moment, and what she'd do with it just a mere minutes later. The courtroom was packed to the brim that morning, with Klaus Grabowski standing with his back to the room at the far end. Without hesitation, Marianne positioned herself, withdrew her .22 caliber Beretta, which she had snuck in under her coat, and fired 8 shots at Klaus. 7 hit their target, ending the life of Klaus Grabowski. Marianne was immediately taken into custody without resistance. Needless to say, Marianne's case generated massive headlines, both in Germany and overseas. Some publications condemned her actions, saying that although they understood her motive, Klaus had a right to a fair trial, and it was up to a jury to decide his fate, not a vigilante. Others, however, sided with her, stating that she had done the right thing by avenging her daughter. One person who arguably agreed with the latter opinion was the judge presiding over Marianne's trial. Although she had been found guilty of premeditated manslaughter, he sentenced Marianne to just 6 years, and she was paroled in June of 1985 after serving just 2 years and 10 months. Marianne Bachmeier passed away on September 17, 1996, at the young age of just 46. She's buried in Lübeck, alongside her daughter, Anna. The image you're looking at shows the capture of double murderer Malcolm Naden, one of the most vile monsters in Australian history. On January 4th, 2005, a 24-year-old mother of 4 by the name of Letitia Nolan had vanished from her home in Dubbo, New South Wales. Despite a thorough investigation, no trace of Letitia could be found anywhere. It remained unclear whether she had left of her own accord, or whether something more sinister had happened to her. But one person was certainly on the investigators' radar. Letitia's own cousin, Malcolm Naden, a 32-year-old abattoir worker who had performed indecent acts upon a youth the previous year. They kept a close eye on Naden, but given that there were no signs of a struggle inside Letitia's home, no body to examine, and no forensic evidence to speak of, all they could do was wait for him to slip up. Then, just 5 months after Letitia went missing, 24-year-old Christy Scholes was found strangled and lifeless in the West Dubbo home of her boyfriend's grandparents. And you know who else was living in that same house at the same time? The cousin of Christy's boyfriend, Malcolm Naden. But rather than stick around and face the consequences of his actions, Naden instead fled the house and went on the run, becoming one of New South Wales's most wanted fugitives, and sparking a manhunt that would last for almost 7 years. During his time as an outlaw, Naden made use of an unusual hideout, the Western Plains Zoo. There, he broke into the manager's hut, where he set up a camp in the roof cavity. During the day, he'd remain up there and stay silent, with the staff and zoogoers completely unaware of his presence. Any noise they did hear in the hut was assumed to be a possum. After the zoo had been closed and locked up, however, he'd venture out into the empty 300-hectare park in search of nourishment, stealing bananas from elephants, rummaging through bins for thrown-out scraps, and using coin-fed barbecues to cook himself meals. During a particularly desperate moment, he even tore the head off a Galapagos tortoise and, quote, sucked out its guts. Naden spent months hiding in the zoo and living amongst the thousands of animals that called it home. That is, until someone spotted him. In a book titled The Contractor, a freelance security expert has described hunting Naden through the Western Plains Zoo with his trusty Remington. He'd received a report of a suspected homeless person living there. Someone had been taking bananas, and the barbecues were found to still be hot at 5 AM. One employee had even seen a trespasser showering in the manager's hut and described him to the book's author, Mike Abernathy, who immediately began investigating. In one chapter, he tells of how he came close to capturing Naden in November of 2005, when he finally did encounter him. We laid fishing line across some of the main footpaths. It wouldn't trap him, but I'd know if he'd been using that trail. By evening, Roger and I were bushed and hungry. So at around 10:40 PM, we left the zoo and headed for Dubbo KFC. We were almost there when Roger got an alert on his mobile phone. We U-turned fast and zipped back to the zoo, where the alert was telling us the breach was in the admin building, right at the main entrance. I told Roger what I was thinking as we drove. The zoo would be black, so he was to let me out in the darkness before we drove the extra 150 meters to the building. We got to the main gate, where he slowed and let the Commodore roll just inside the gateway. I got out, and it was a still, warm night, and I stalked to my left, through some trees and past the hire centre. I crossed the main car park in pitch blackness. It was dark and quiet and very still. Roger continued motoring to the admin building, and as he slowed to a stop, he hit his high beams. Right in front of me, beside a large LPG tank against the admin building, a man stood up. It was him. He was looking away from me at the time, at the car, but he quickly turned back. I don't know who was more scared, him or me, but we were 3 meters from one another, and the way our eyes locked was primordial. The look we shared was one of mutual homicide. I was ready to kill him, because those eyes told me that was the only way he would allow himself to be caught. Naden managed to escape capture that night by fleeing into the brush, and remained elusive for over half a decade. He had another close encounter in December of 2011, when officers tracked him down near Noendok. He managed to get away after shooting one of them. Naden continued to evade the law for a few more months, until he was finally apprehended in a cabin at Rawdon Vale on March 22nd, 2012, shown here in this photo. During his trial the following year, Naden pleaded guilty to taking the lives of his cousin, Letitia Nolan, and his other cousin's partner, Christy Scholes, as well as for attempting to end the life of the officer 3 months prior, and a plethora of other charges.
I would have been going for his chest and his heart.
Why was it that you'd aim for his heart?
I was shooting to kill. Yeah, I wasn't messing around or anything.
Okay.
Yeah. Once you kill somebody, you do it again. You just won't care.
He admitted that on the day of her slaying, he had bumped into his cousin Letitia by pure chance. He wanted to go fishing, and so, kindly, she offered to give him a ride. He ended her life in the vehicle. In the end, the judge sentenced 39-year-old Naden to life, telling him, "Life outside of prison is not an option for you." Naden calmly replied, "Thank you, Your Honor." While serving his sentence, Naden was struck several times in the head with a sandwich toaster handle by his fellow inmate and second cousin, Dean Nolan. Dean said this was retribution for the heartache and headache he had caused the Nolan family. Letitia Nolan's remains were finally unearthed in 2016 at Butler Falls near Dubbo, allowing her family some closure and putting this case to rest. A huge thank you to all of my supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon, especially my biggest supporters: Matt Fennell, George Lopez, Holly Lyons, Alex Greensall, Asiamina, Azrael Warakai, Brad Hammer 33, Chief Cochuaque, Colin Monsma, Connor Louthan, Wewzow, Doopsy, Gina Valera, Ian Biluck, Infamous-senpapi, Monica Mendoza, Peter Lulgjuraj, Ruth Vika Shindi, Taylor&Monica Gruenke, TnSMOM, Hamish K, Lydia Ciummo, Nephus 1988, Itai Alon, and Ellen Dolloff. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to Scentbird for sponsoring today's video. You can help support the channel by checking them out via the link in the description. Make sure to use coupon code MASQUERADE for 55% off your first month. Until next time, the devil's in the detail.